Welcome in, everybody. It is that time once again. Preview season here on the Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes, along with Trey Reeves, Garrett Turney. I'm Mitch Mason. Glad to have you with us for the first of many episodes previewing the 2024 college football season. To get right into it, here's how the next couple of weeks really are going to look. We're going to be breaking down each conference, each power conference, one episode at a time. Each episode is going to be about 25 to 30 minutes in length. And we are going to reverse power rank the teams as you guys surveyed them. We sent out a bunch of surveys about a month ago. You guys power ranked each conference one through however many teams that conference had. We are going to preview them in descending order. So for the Big Ten, we're going to be doing teams 18 through 11 in this episode, 10 through 6 on Wednesday's episode, and 5 through 1 on Friday's episode. That will be the format that we follow all preseason long. We're going to have group of 5 content as well coming out later. But for right now, it is the Big Ten Conference preview. They have the reigning national champion in the Michigan Wolverines. And Trey, Garrett, as we get ready to do this, before we jump into actually previewing the teams, what's kind of the top storyline? And Trey, I'll start with you. What's the top storyline in your mind for the Big Ten?
I think my byline kind of says it all. If you're just listening, it says 2 Big Ten because this conference is massive with 18 teams. We've never seen a conference this big before. Obviously, there's a couple other ones. The ACC was 17, the Big 12 was 16, SEC was 16. That's the story for me in the Big Ten. How do the misaligned schedules really work out for certain teams and really hurt others? Because there's certain teams that might be way better than their record indicates because of the draws they got. And there's some teams that might go 9-3 or 10-2 because they got an easy schedule, but bowl season might show that they might be not as good as their record indicates because of the draw they got.
Yeah, Trey, I was going to say my big thing I'm looking for here is national dominance. I want to see kind of how this shakes out. For better or worse, this has turned into kind of a 2-conference sport at the moment where it's going to be, probably 1 or 2 conferences are going to get the champion every year. And, they're going to be kind of hoarding the power at the top. Question is, who is that top conference? A lot of people kind of default to the SEC, and that might still be true, but there's a lot of really good teams in the Big Ten. And I want to see kind of how many of them, not just because of the schedules, but because of how good they are, how many of them can rise up and compete when it comes time for the playoff.
I'm excited to see what the pecking order ends up being this year, right? Most conferences, in fact, every conference, aside from the Sun Belt in Division I FBS football, has gotten rid of divisions. So teams like Iowa, Minnesota, they can't hide in the West any longer. They can't go 8-4 and still get a trip to Indianapolis and somehow pull off an upset and get an auto berth into the college football playoff. It is the top 2 teams will go to Indianapolis in this case, and will fight for that auto berth as the Big Ten champion. Of course, reminder before we get into this episode, all of our episodes brought to you by Home Field Apparel. The good brand is doing amazing work. They've got all kinds of new collections, gear, hats, shirts, you name it, ready for college football season. You can use our code 3TechPod for 15% off your first order. Or if you're a repeat customer, shop through the link in our bio. It'll help support the show and continue to get the great merch that you're used to from Home Field Apparel. Gentlemen, without any further ado, let's hop into it. Again, these rankings provided by you, the listener, who filled out those surveys about a month ago, and you ranked Purdue as the last place team in the Big Ten this year. This shocked me when I was putting this document together. We have over 30,000 written words compiling all of these previews together, and the Big Ten is one of the longest previews, Trey, as you mentioned, with 18 teams. But Purdue, the Boilermakers, under Ryan Walters in year 2, sitting at dead last. They were 85th in scoring a season ago, 84th in passing offense, which, remember, Graham Harrell is the offensive coordinator, one of the prodigal sons of this air raid offense, played under Mike Leach. He's supposed to be someone that's, able to go out and implement it with relative ease. It's not really been the case wherever Graham has gone, unfortunately, offensively. And then 98th in scoring defense were the Boilermakers last year. All of that compiled for a 4-8 record in 2023. Trey, I feel like the offense has a chance to be much better this year. They have a couple of new transfers coming in at tackle. The offensive line looks like it's going to be better. And specifically, the wide receivers are healthy this year. I think there are a number of options that Hudson Card has at his disposal, but 18th, it feels a little low to me for Purdue. How does it feel for you?
I mean, you never want to say dead last feels about right, but the Boilermakers really didn't show a lot last year to make us rank them any higher, make our listeners rank them any higher. I do agree. They are bringing in some really nice talent, especially to the receiver room. You got CJ Smith, and Nylan Morset, Cam Brown from UCLA. Lots of options. And defensively, they added some fun guys too. But like you said, Mitch, I was really high on Purdue last year. I thought they could be a sleeper team in the Big Ten, but they've just really struggled under under the offensive coordinator Graham Harrell, and I really want to see him implement that before I fully believe. They do have a 4.5 over under this year. It seems like the public is leaning away from that, betting the under. I don't know. It's going to be a very interesting schedule for them as well.
It's a tough schedule that they've got. Certainly, a large margin of success is not on the cards for Purdue this year. But you mentioned the health of the wide receivers. They've got a guy from FAU who's finally healthy in Jamal Adrine. He was supposed to be the go-to wide receiver last year, and he gets hurt in fall camp, wouldn't you know? So didn't get to play at all last season. You mentioned the over/under. It's 4.5. The critical stretch that we highlighted, and if you want to read any of these previews, again, they're over on our Substack. Just search 3Tech Pod Substack or visit the link in our bio. You can get connected there. We've written all of these previews out for you. So if you want to read along or if you want to read at a later time, you're more than welcome to do so. The critical stretch that I highlighted, guys, was Oregon State through Illinois. It's a difficult schedule, but there is a path to a bowl. And if you read Phil Steele's preview, he actually expects Purdue to go bowling this year at a 6-6 or a 7-5 record. So well above that Vegas over under. But they've got Notre Dame, Oregon, Ohio State, and Penn State all on their schedule this year. So you assume those are kind of 4 losses. They do have 3 of them at home. So conceivably, you could get Purdue to a 7-5 mark. But in that critical stretch, I think it's at the very beginning. They've got to get wins over Oregon State, Wisconsin, and Illinois if they're going to think about getting to a bowl game. This isn't the same Spoilermakers crew, I don't think, that we've become accustomed to, right? And Jeff Brom had a reputation for being kind of the worst nightmare on a Friday or Saturday night if you went into West Lafayette. This doesn't have that same feeling. So I think the offense is certainly expected to be better this year. They've got some new guys at edge rush, so hopefully they can get to the passer. But again, that scoring defense was so poor a season ago. I'm a little bit more reserved on Purdue than it seems like some of the other experts are. I know their numbers are saying, hey, you were bad last year. You need to improve this year. There's room for that improvement, but it's still a very difficult schedule. Garrett, 4.5 might be a little bit low on the over under. Would you take Purdue to get to a bowl game?
I honestly would not. I don't think there's a lot of guaranteed slam dunk wins on this schedule. There's maybe a couple that you could point to, but they miss. I mean, like, they miss Michigan in the conference in terms of tough teams. They hit almost every other good team that's going to be in this conference. And so, I don't look at this and I say there's a great chance of them hitting a bowl game. They might hit the over. Right now, I'd probably chalk them up right at about 4. And I'd probably let them go about 4 wins before I feel like I'm really having to stretch to get them to that 5th win. But yeah, I don't know that I see them getting to a bowl game. You lose the Big Ten sack leader, you're not going to be better on defense. That's just not going to happen. Is when not just your own sack leader, but the conference sack leader. You're just not going to be better on defense. It could be a little bit of a tough year watching Purdue football. The weapons are there on offense. My big question is just, can you stop anybody? And right now, I just don't really believe it.
Losing Deion Burks, their leading wide receiver, to Oklahoma through the portal didn't help either. I think that wide receiver core is deep enough to at least recreate him in the aggregate, to quote Moneyball. But yeah, it could be another tough year for Purdue. We'll see if they can get those key wins on the road that they need to reach a bowl game. But Purdue coming in at number 18 in our power rankings. Number 17 in the Big Ten is Rutgers. And guys, I'm appalled at this. Rutgers was a much better team than this last year. They went 7-6. They went bowling. Greg Schiano has that program headed in the right direction. But lo and behold, the Jimmies and the Joes have put them in the cellar of the Big Ten this year. You could certainly say that Rutgers might take a step back after such a nice season last year. But I think the numbers, aside from the quarterback, which we'll get to in just a moment, the numbers are actually pointing to Rutgers progressing another win or two this season. They were 94th in scoring last year and 102nd in total offense, which I think really emphasizes how poor they were through the air. Gavin Wimstat was the starting quarterback. He's gone now. And it's Athen Kaliakmanis that comes in to take over at the helm, coming over from Minnesota. Another offense that wasn't great at throwing the football last season. But this offense runs through Kyle Monagai, the electric running back that honestly not enough people know about. He stole the show in 2023, and I expect Rutgers to do a lot of the same this year. Notable additions for this team, as I mentioned, Kaliakmanis comes over. They get one of the leading wide receivers in all of the FCS from Monmouth in Demir Miller. He's a dangerous weapon out wide and actually led the FCS with almost 1,300 receiving yards. So I think they're going to have the same production on the ground. They get a nice option out wide at wide receiver. Can Athen take that step forward with Kirk Shiraka calling plays for Rutgers? We'll see. The losses I mentioned, Gavin Wimstat's gone. They lost some depth in the running back and wide receiver room, but nothing that this team can't overcome. For me, guys, the key storyline for this team is the veteran-laden defense. This was one of the best defenses in the entire country last year. They finished 16th in the country. And I wrote in their preview last year that if that defense could stand on its head, I think the offense could do enough and they could reach a bowl game. Lo and behold, a 7-6 season. So if that defense can continue to hold the line, there's no reason, fellas, that this team can't go bowling for the second straight year. Their critical stretch, when I look at their schedule, is Nebraska through USC. The bookends of Rutgers' schedule are really forgiving. I think they can make their hay at the beginning and the end of that schedule. So there's plenty of reason for optimism, in my opinion, for Scarlet Knights fans. What defines success for me this year is how they do at Nebraska. They've got Wisconsin and UCLA, and then at USC. Garrett, that's a 4-game stretch that those teams aren't unbeatable, and especially at home in Piscataway, I feel like Rutgers could steal one or two of those.
There's a good chance they do. And I think the thing that a lot of people aren't talking about is they didn't really perform particularly well statistically and then still go 7-6. Like that's
Exactly.
they weren't really that good. And you're going to hear a lot about how they brought in a transfer quarterback who wasn't all that good, didn't throw for all that many yards. Last I checked, Wimsat threw for fewer. Like it's a slight upgrade. I think Wimsat threw for like 17 something and change. So like I'm not entirely convinced that this is I'm not entirely convinced that this is a downgrade at the quarterback. So it may not be much of an upgrade, but I'm not convinced that they're really getting that much worse. You bring in a little bit more talent. And by the way, they've been sitting behind in the Big Ten for a little while. They've been sitting in a division where you've got to go over there, play Ohio State every year, play Michigan every year, and play Penn State every year. And I'm checking up and down the schedule, and my eyes almost can't believe I don't see any of those helmets on their schedule, right? I don't see Penn State. I don't see Ohio State. I don't see Michigan. And so, I'm looking at this. Oh, by the way, don't see Oregon either, who's probably going to be the other big team in the Big Ten. So you're missing a lot of the top of the conference this year. This is about as soft of a schedule as you could hope for. And I think what we're talking about now in terms of success for Rutgers, if it was just up to me, it's now about building a program. Like, right, we're not talking about you had a one-off good year, you have like one good player and one guy. Like, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, hey, you could actually build on something here and become a little bit of a destination possibly for, some of that talent in the transfer portal. If you can go out there and maybe go win, 8 games and 9 games, or I'm not saying I predict them to do that right now, but if you can go and do something like that, you're talking about a very, very hot Rutgers team going into the following season. And so to me, I don't understand why Rutgers is so down on this list. I actually think they have probably the best conditions currently in the Big Ten to have some form of success. Not even a really tough out of conference. I mean, I know Virginia Tech is a tough one, but
That'll be
you
hard.
get Howard and Akron, so it's not that bad. I think this sets up real favorable for Rutgers.
I've got Rutgers at 6-6 minimum this year. Their
Yeah.
over under is set at 6.5 at time of recording. I think they're going over that. I think 7-5, 8-4 against this schedule is very, very realistic. Again, we'll see what they get out of the quarterback position, but a familiar play caller for Athens, and hopefully he takes a step forward throwing the football. Trey, at number 16, we've got the Michigan State Spartans under new management, under all kinds of new talent evaluation, as they lost 38 players to the portal. They also brought in a host of new players at all different kinds of positions. Michigan State coming in at 16 on our power rankings is voted on by the viewers. But I feel like this program has hit the reset button. And this is year one of a top-down rebuild that I think is going to be good in East Lansing in the long run.
Yeah, I think we need a term that's even more drastic than rebuild, honestly, because what Jonathan Smith is going to have to do, the reputation of this program is in the dumps. If you could buy a penny stock right now in a program, it might be Michigan State, because Jonathan Smith, he's a program builder. He did it in Corvallis with way less access to talent than he's going to have in East Lansing. So I'm excited about them long term, but I do think 16 is about right in the power rankings for this year. You mentioned they lost a ton of guys in the portal. Obviously, this is a loaded conference, but 24 transfers coming in, a nice little high school recruiting class. They got Aiden Childs to follow Jonathan Smith from Oregon State. That's a huge, huge start, because a lot of the issues last year, at least on offensive side of the ball, could be pointed to a lack of consistent quarterback play after they lost Peyton Thorne so late in the game. So getting Aiden Childs, one of the most sought after quarterbacks in the portal, is a huge, huge pickup. Following Jonathan Smith, he got a nice tight end pickup in Jack Verling. And defensively, they got a lot of help, but man, that's a defense that needs a lot of help. And they're going to have a lot of guys step up really quickly. Jalen Stachel and Ben Roberts, going to be a couple of guys that need to plug some holes up front. We've got Jordan Matthews from Wisconsin on the back end. So, it's going to be really interesting to see how quickly those guys gel, because like you mentioned, 38 transfers left. This is not a rebuild. This is something completely deeper. And so the goal this year, I think, like you wrote, Mitch, is just to lay the foundation, right? I don't think, if you want to dream big, going to a bowl game, the over-under set at 4.5, but this is a lay the foundation year for Jonathan Smith at Michigan State, and a trust the process year for sure, because he has a ton of work cut out for him, has a lot of talent, but man, having to play Ohio State, having to play at Michigan, they do miss Penn State this year, which is a nice plus, I guess, but it's not an easy schedule from a management standpoint, especially when you're trying to get so many transfers to gel so quickly. Mm-hmm. You wrote that the critical stretch is Indiana through Rutgers, and I think that's totally agreeable, because they're going to be battered and bruised after the front half of their schedule. It starts easily with FAU, then you go immediately to Maryland to open Big Ten play. I think Maryland's far and away above Michigan State right now. And then you come back home for Prairie View, go to Boston College. Again, another team that has some of these winnable games on the road. That's just a tough thing to start out with, first-year coach. So can you weather the storm of Ohio State, Oregon, Iowa, and Michigan, all back-to-back games, and then close strong with Indiana, at Illinois, Purdue, and Rutgers? That's where the wins can be found. And if they can, weather that storm and come out stronger on the back half, maybe they have a strong close and make a bowl game. I think that's the best case scenario for Michigan State this year. Weather the storm, especially that middle stretch that's just absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
And then come out of that stronger and push for a bowl game.
Yeah, they're over-unders at 4.5. I don't think going bowling is out of the question for all the reasons you just described. Look, Aiden Childs is a talented quarterback, showed what he had at Oregon State. I love that he's got a four-star wide receiver in Nick Marsh, who's an electric playmaker out wide. Jack Velling is a security blanket at tight end. So they've got some pieces. Cal Halliday, the starting middle linebacker on that defensive unit, I think is going to be a lot of fun. One of the best players in the Big Ten. They've got some pieces. They've just got to put it all together. I think we trust Jonathan Smith in the long run. It's just
Absolutely. Yeah.
how quickly do you get that program up and off the ground from the ashes that it's been left in by Mel Tucker and company. Number 15 is the Northwestern Wildcats. Garrett, they had a surprise season last year. Everyone counted them out. They had a hazing scandal at the very beginning of the year that led to some staff dismissals. And then in walks David Braun, who everybody counted out. And all he does is go 8-5 with a bowl win over Utah. Northwestern, they have had maybe some struggles putting it together consistently, and they had another number of transfers leave the program. But where do we sit on the Wildcats this season?
I'm actually a little bit higher on them. I know that's not necessarily the most favorable schedule, real tough close for Northwestern, and maybe a little bit of a tricky open as well. But I think what you were able to see last year in a team that kind of just rallied together and really built something, I think that's really, really cool. I think what they were able to do is cool. And also, by the way, the whole everyone doubted them. We'll go hands up on this one. I'm pretty sure when that broke, we were all just like, oh, man, this sucks for Northwestern. They're not going to win a game this year. Are they even going to play football? Are they going to cancel the – like, it was a little bit melodramatic last year from a lot of people, including, at times us. And I want to say what a heck of a job for Northwestern actually getting to the point where they got last year, winning 8 games. It really, really, really cool. But with that being said, obviously, losing a bunch of pieces in the portal is going to be tough. But I like some of the stuff that they have. Mentioned, bringing a quarterback, Mike Wright, Mississippi State. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think that he's got some talent there. And if you look at some of the numbers last year from the quarterback position, it's not like Ben Bryant blew it up. It's not like he was just this, amazing over the top, passer. It's a lot of inconsistency, and just not elite performance out of them. And I like bringing back Cam Porter as well. He's a big physical back. I think he's going to do a really good job there as well. Look, end of the day, you look at another team, kind of like what we just talked about. They didn't particularly perform well in a lot of phases of the game, and then still found a way to win a bunch of games. They played well on defense. They just didn't score. They didn't score. And so, if they can find a way to, get a little bit of uptick in the offensive side, maybe get a couple pieces together. There are a lot of seniors in this offensive system. So I do think a little bit of experience could end up winning out for them. And the schedule's, it's honestly not that bad. You do have a really tough close. You play Ohio State and Michigan back-to-back in November, but there's a lot of games to be had at the beginning of the schedule and kind of in through the middle. Got to look out for Miami off the top. Obviously, Miami, the Miami, Ohio Redhawks could be an interesting game. Could be one that Miami comes out and wins. That is a conference champion from last year, so got to take them seriously. Duke as well, not necessarily going to be a pushover Duke team. I know they lost their head coach, but still going to be a formidable opponent. But then you go through there, Eastern Illinois, at Washington, Indiana, Maryland, Wisconsin, Iowa, Purdue. Nothing that necessarily is like that's a for sure loss, right? There's some teams on there you say, I'd pick it the other way, but not a lot of for sure losses. And if they can find something on offense, maybe get a little bit of momentum towards the beginning of the schedule, maybe a repeat performance. I'm not going to pick them to get all the way up to 8 again. That would be a little bit crazy, but you could go see another bowl game that might hit 6 wins.
Yeah, my issue with Northwestern is they only have 4 returning starters on either side of the offensive and defensive line, 2 on the offense, 2 on the defense. You're rebuilding the trenches. It's a new quarterback. You lost, kind of your primary wide receiver and DB talent to the portal, like Rod Hurd left for Notre Dame. So I do think it's a little bit of an uphill climb to expect Northwestern to be a top 40 defensive unit once again. They were 36th last year. I feel like Northwestern is one of those teams that I personally have sliding back. Their over-under is 5.5. I would not bet them to go over. Neither is the public. The odds right now are plus 168 for Northwestern to go bowling. So, at the end of the day, though, David Braun, he made fools of us last year. Let's see if he can do it again this season. It would be a tremendous story. Maybe not as shocking as the story was last year, but still a heck of a feat if Northwestern was able to reach the postseason 2 years in a row.
Gracious, how about